Hello, friends. Tara Bachland here, the author of You-niversal Self-care, Improved Health Through Self-Understanding, and the creator of the Weight Free Wellness podcast. And today's talk is about eating disorders. And if you haven't read my book yet, I'd like to share that I do share my story of my eating disorder with anorexia in the beginning of my book and how it led me to. It actually was a very powerful point in my wellness journey and how it led me to become more compassionate with my body and start working with my body rather than on my body. And being the creator of the Weight Free Wellness podcast, and especially with this episode, I want to just clarify, lest there's any confusion, that the name Weight Free Wellness is about being weight free in the sense of getting off the scale and getting onto wellness, really taking care of your body and what's best for your overall being. So everybody's at a different point on their wellness path. I like to bring on guests who I think are great resources for wherever you may be at. And I'm very happy to invite to the Weight Free Wellness podcast, Lisa Diers. She is a registered dietitian and a experienced registered yoga teacher, which means she has some extra time and training in there, and is the director of nutrition and yoga at the E-RYT program, an eating disorder treatment program located in Minnesota, Washington, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. I believe I read the states correct. WA is Washington, right?
Correct. You've got it.
Okay, good. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tara.
So what kind of conditions, just jumping in, for those who, are there just two eating disorders? Is there just anorexia and bulimia? I mean, what does the E-RYT program actually work with?
It's a really great question. There are a variety of different types of eating disorders. And what we treat at the E-RYT program are all types of eating disorders across the body spectrum, across the diagnostic spectrum, and across the age spectrum. So the main eating disorder diagnoses that I think most people are familiar with, or maybe hear the most often, are anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder. And then there's a group that was formerly known as eating disorder non otherwise specified, which is that has changed with the DSM-5. But what it is a diagnostic tool for clinicians to help people who might not fully meet the requirement for anorexia or bulimia or binge eating disorder, but are definitely struggling with disordered eating to the point where it's disrupting their life and overall well-being.
So that's quite a spectrum. I mean, how does someone actually know if they are experiencing eating disorder or if someone around them is? Because there's so much, even you could disguise it as being healthy or being in wellness. But where is the distinction?
Oh, that's a really great question too, especially in the culture that we have here in America in particular, very body focused, food focused, weight focused culture. And I like to say that it's so common, especially for women, and now, even more so for men, for us to connect and relate to each other based on weight and diet conversations. It's just as common as talking about the weather. So it can be really challenging to decipher what is truly an eating disorder, especially when we value control over food so much in this country. So what I like to say, unfortunately, eating disorders do not discriminate. That's one of the things I'd like to definitely get across. So, we teach children, or we treat children with RFID and all sorts of disordered eating on the spectrum. So, anywhere from a very young age to a very advanced age, senior age. So that's one thing to consider. Age discrimination is not something that happens with an eating disorder. Neither is socioeconomic status. So really, eating disorders are a maladaptive coping skill for life stressors. So how can you tell if somebody has an eating disorder? I mean, you don't really know necessarily unless we do have them see a professional who can clinically diagnose it. But there are definitely some signs that would lead one to question either themselves or someone they love to see if they are in harm's way. And one of those things would be, if they change significantly their eating patterns. all of a sudden, they maybe were eating any and every type of food, pretty much ate in a balanced way. And now they've restricted a major food group, or they seem to be a little bit more, they seem to be extreme about food and a little bit more anxious about food choices or food options that are presented to them. So the relationship with food really changes to the point where you, as from an outside observer, you're curious about that. Like that feels different than what they were doing before. Also, eating disorders they thrive in isolation. There's a lot of shame and fear and isolation type behaviors that happen when somebody is struggling. So if you notice somebody is not doing the things that they usually would do, or not engaging in the fun things that they typically would go out and do with friends or colleagues, coworkers, what have you. So they're isolating a little bit more secretive and just not quite themselves, maybe a little bit more depressed, and maybe irritable and just not quite themselves. So that's a first indicator. And those are some first indicators that you might wonder what might be going on with this person.
Are there any patterns as to what people experiencing an eating disorder are trying to help by their choices? Or is it different by each case?
That's a really good question. Well, first of all, I think every person is unique, and every eating disorder has definitely unique components to it because we're all unique individuals. And no one chooses to have an eating disorder. I think that's also a really great point that I hope that your listeners today can walk away with. It's not a choice to have an eating disorder. It's a mental health illness, and it has the highest mortality rate of any other mental health illness. So it's a very severe illness that, fortunately, we can treat and help people live in recovery, but it's not a choice. One way to really, really generalize and simplify would be when life feels out of control, the two things as humans that we can kind of control, I guess, for the lack of a better phrase, is our weight and our food. And so now again, I've been doing eating disorder treatment for 12 years. It's a very complex and multifaceted illness to struggle with, so it's complicated. But to generalize it, if I'm experiencing internal turmoil and I feel like I have no control over it, the false sense of control of manipulating my food or self-medicating with food or changing weight and being distracted by that can serve as a distraction from that internal turmoil. It can numb out that internal sensation, but of course is not a long-term healthy way to cope with life stressors.
That makes a lot of sense because even with my experience, I didn't go to treatment or anything. I kind of just, this kind of fantasizes it, but I kind of just came out of it. I had a couple of significant people in my life, a teacher and an aunt, who expressed concern. And it was just at the right time too, where I knew that I was just so tired and, all the usual stuff was happening around me, but it wasn't helping. I wasn't feeling better, restricting and controlling my life in that way wasn't actually making my feel better overall. I might have thought that now I'm the size that's quote normal, but it wasn't really helping. And so it's interesting years later to actually get some insight as to what maybe was going on. And that does make sense. Like it was a way, at that point in my life, I was probably at the peak, probably 13. And it does make sense that it was a way to control something about my life.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, like in retrospect, you could see it that way. And that might be the truth for many people. Like in the moment, you're not consciously choosing necessarily this as a coping mechanism, but looking back upon it, you can see in a very generalized way. The other piece of it is too, is we don't really know what causes eating disorders. We know the cause is multifactorial. There's genetics plays a heavy component in having an eating disorder, but also the environment that we grow up in. In dieting, for people who are predispositioned, especially on top of life circumstances, dieting can be one of the biggest triggers that sets off the eating disorder, the actual physiological and emotional stress that's placed on a person when food is restricted or controlled. So it happens in so many different ways for so many different reasons. And when you're able to get to that place of feeling a little bit more grounded and stable and understanding your relationship to your body and your mind and your life circumstances and the genetic cards, so to speak, that you've been dealt, then you can see it as um, maybe there's a lesson in it, a learning of how your mind works and how you respond to life's circumstances and how you can do it in a more sustainable and healthy way.
So you mentioned environment and diet. Am I correct in interpreting that you're saying if a person grows up in a household where there's dieting going on or emphasis on being a certain weight, that may predispose someone in the environment to have an eating disorder?
Well, we don't know for sure. What we do know is some people can grow up in that type environment and not get an eating disorder. So if the genetic predisposition is there, and the environment is there, they're definitely more likely to develop an eating disorder. But again, it's not 100%. It's just like, for example, we live in such a image-based society, food shaming-based society, weight shaming-based society, and some people get eating disorders and some people don't. And yet we're bombarded with these messages every day, whether it's through whatever media we choose to interact with, or just daily interaction with people and how people comment about bodies and food. And some people get eating disorders and some people don't.
Mhm.
So we're really, the Emily program, especially, and other amazing institutions across the country and the world, quite frankly, we're interested in this. Like, how does this happen? How can we help find the solution and really help people determine, like, okay, here's your genetic makeup, here's your environmental makeup, here's what you're probably predispositioned to, and we know that more than ever now. But let's continue to refine this process so people can get the help that they need sooner and more tailored to them.
In preparing for this interview, I went to the Emily Program website, and you have some great resources in how to identify if someone around you or yourself are experiencing an eating disorder. And I personally choose, this is just a personal thing, I say experience most of the time, because I feel that if you say I have, it's like it belongs to you.
Yeah.
And that's just something that I've chosen in my life. But so there's a great resource there, because there's just not enough time. I could talk for hours to you. I want to know all, like, the genetic um, factors and so forth. But I also want to get to, what does a person do and what does the Emily program offer?
Mhm.
How do you, if you don't know the causes, how do you tailor a program? And that's a big question.
Yeah, that is. Well, and it's not that we might not, as a discipline, like, as eating disorders as a whole, we might not know exactly what causes an eating disorder, but we definitely know, and are well versed in the factors that play into it. And so even though it's unique to each person, there are general themes and patterns, like you had mentioned earlier, that we know over time and over lots of research and lots of clinical experience. So, there are certain tactics and evidence-based forms of treatment and therapy that we use at the Emily program to help treat people with anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, manage anxiety, manage depression. And so there are well-studied approaches to that, which is amazing that we have come so far in a short period of time. If you really stop and think about the historical breadth of eating disorder treatment. When I was a kid, there was no treatment around, so it's really come a long way and it's amazing. And we see people recover. I see people recover all the time. And it's, that's what's So when we approach that at the Emily program, one of the questions that I think you're asking is, kind of what could you expect when you come here? And um, when a person comes to the Emily program, we visit with them. Obviously, there's a clinical assessment that happens to determine what type of eating disorder they might have, and then based on that, we are recommending certain types of treatment based on our clinical knowledge and the research and what that person needs and is ready for. So whether that's attending an intensive day program where there's supported meals and snacks, group process, yoga therapy, um, those kinds of components, or whether it's outpatient where you're sitting one-on-one with a therapist and a dietitian, or whether it's residential where the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, acute treatment is needed. We have all of those options to treat people and to help them reconnect, rediscover, and repair the relationship to food, body, and themselves.
That's very interesting. So it sounds like education is a large component to this, and group atmosphere.
Education experiential. You can, all of our clients are amazingly brilliant people, and I really mean that. It's amazing how much they know and how much knowledge they carry. So it's not for lack of knowledge. The experience of being able to eat a food that you're afraid of that maybe you haven't eaten ever without using your eating disorder to cope with it is what we call exposure therapy. And so if we can help people have the experience in a different and a healthy way and develop the tools and the skills to cope with life and their eating disorder in that way, then we've succeeded, right? If we've got a toolbox that people can go into for what they know they need to cope in a more effective way, and they're living their life in recovery and not in the eating disorder, well, then there we go. So the experiential piece is important. Really, it's really important in the work that we do.
I know for in my own journey later, learning about nutrition, and I personally am a real big fan of the Nourishing Traditions, Weston A. Price line of teaching that really teaches wholesome type foods, um, traditionally prepared foods, I'll say. It it really helped me to connect with my body in the sense that I'm nourishing my body, and the great things that can happen from just having uh, vibrant skin and hair to fertility, and how it can help you to have energy throughout the day. So is your dietetics, is it more, you know, classroom style, this is what vitamin A and this is what vitamin B does, or is it, these are the things that it does for your body? I'm just curious, you know, like if you were sitting with me, or I'm with someone in front of you, what kind of lessons would you be sharing?
That's a really great question. We do like this really amazing mix of approaches where we're doing the education. Like, look, um, our bodies are made up of the components of food that we eat. So, for example, carbohydrates are made out of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We are carbon beings. We're made out of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So when you're missing key components of food, you're missing key components of yourself. So there's education that happens from a purely dietetic professional training standpoint of this. Yes, this is what vitamin A does for your body. This is what sodium does for your body. This is what carbohydrates, protein, fats, all of those things do for your body and affects your mental health and your energy levels and your overall well-being. And then here is the part, the nutrition counseling, I guess, so to speak, part of the repairing your relationship with food. If I'm afraid of eating a food that society deems as bad, that is far more stressful on the system than being able to eat it in a balanced way, balanced variety, moderation, and not use these dangerous coping skills to manage the fear, guilt, whatever it is that I feel about eating that food. So that's the nutritional counseling piece of it and that exposure therapy piece of it. And then there's the education that happens in a group type setting where clients are coming together in a group and the registered dietitian is talking about both a didactic educational portion of nutrition, but also the real life experience portion of nutrition. So if you know this is what you need to be following in your meal plan for your recovery journey right now, how are we going to make that actually work in your day, at the grocery store, when you're cooking? Like, let's get real, because we can talk about it all we want. And that's important and that's a part of it. But we also have to make plans and plan for success by actually following through with the plans.
I'm a real big proponent of people finding out what works for them. And that takes a little bit of experimenting. But even through my book, I teach body typing, which is not to necessarily label people, but is to get a different perspective. Sometimes is when we step outside that we actually get quite an interesting view of ourselves, our life experience. And I know for me, doing things like trying different foods, trying different ways of cooking has really helped me to become more familiar with my body. And I think we can even sometimes, even in the wellness field, uh, do food shaming or vegan
Oh,
shaming. For example, I recently did a genetic test that revealed that my body needs more omega-6. Now, by our dietetic standards, most people would say, no, cut down on
yeah.
omega-6. We
Mhm,
have enough of those, up your omega-3s.
mhm.
And when I upped my omega-6, my skin improved. It just kind of helped link a number of things and bring them together. And I find personally that even flexibility of mind was such a component for me, not only coming out of eating disorder, but to not take that mentality into health, what I could quote, bring under this umbrella of health and wellness. That for me, it was actually was learning flexibility and being open to what my body needs. And it sounds like that's a part of what you're offering, as you said, that this may be what you need right now on your part of the journey to healing.
Right. And I think, Tara, first of all, I think it's amazing what you're just the self-discovery that continues to unfold before you. And that's the exciting part of life. Like, we always have this opportunity to self-discover and to feel confident in the decisions that we make for ourselves. And that's just amazing. When you first come into treatment, right, in a very general way, the eating disorder is taken over. And to tease out what is truly right for you takes time and practice. So it might not be right off the bat, we're going to know that you need more omega 6s. It might be, let's get some of these symptoms under control. Let's get a pattern and a predictability to eating. Let's explore the fear foods, and then let's continue to move along the spectrum to determine what is your nutritional blueprint. And and that's important, especially as we learn more and more about the human microbiome and the connection between gut health and brain health. And and that, to me, really ties in what you're talking about too, a real holistic perspective, and in the ability to know what works for you and to own it. If you know what works for you is to eat a food that most people would say, I can't believe you're eating that. Aren't you a dietitian, or aren't you a wellness expert? But that satisfies another need for you that's healthy and balanced. And if you don't, it implies restriction and deprivation and might lead to something else. Then own it. That's what you need. That's yours. And uh, that, to me, like, I want every client at the program to walk away with, from a nutrition and a yoga perspective, especially because that's what I know the best, is to feel like they know their nutritional blueprint and their body blueprint, that they can own what works for them. And keep your eyes on your own yoga mat, I guess, in as a way to summarize that.
That's awesome. I have a quick story to share, just like on the food thing. So before I knew that I needed more omega-6s, I've always loved like crisp chicken skin, not even fried, but like chicken skin when a chicken's been baked. And people would look at me like, that's so weird. But omega or chicken is high in omega-6. And
Right.
after I got those results and I started, I get more of my omegas from borage oil, but it made so much sense. Like, that's why my body was saying, yes, have that. And now I own it.
Good for you. Own that chicken skin. That's great.
That's cool. So, as followers of this podcast will know, I'm a big fan of yoga too. It played a huge role in my life. And I think it actually was the greater component in me learning self compassion, because you can be on the yoga mat and you're trying to do a pose. And there's a time where all of us are like, no, I'm just going to force my way into this pose. But you learn ultimately you have to kind of succumb to and just be where you're going to be. And so it was really neat to hear that yoga is a part of the Emily program, and I imagine that that's very helpful in many ways to the people who go there.
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, I'm not going to speak for our clients, but the testimonials that they give obviously are mostly positive about yoga, and it's a very much a big part of what we do. And we just published our first randomized control trial study on the role of yoga and mealtime anxiety and eating disorder treatment. So I'm very committed um, to really getting the research out there so that we can better understand not only how it works, but how can we best implement yoga into eating disorder treatment that serves our clients to the greatest capacity. So we have about 90 yoga classes that run a week at the Emily program, and
Did you
it's
say 90?
uh-huh,
90? Wow.
yeah. Yep, and the yoga and body image groups. Well, they're a body image group co-facilitated by a therapist with a mindful movement component. But those are also groups that we've researched, and I'm currently writing out the manuscript right now to submit. So we are really committed to that, and the role of yoga and mindful movement. Yoga. I'm a yoga teacher. I love yoga. Obviously, I have a bias there, but really, when we get into movement in general, like mindful, focused movement with intention, slowing down, noticing the messages that your body has for you. That's a very yogic way to say it, but like, well, how does my body feel and what am I actually feeling is extremely important in the recovery process, whether yoga is the facilitator of that or something else. So it does serve our clients well as an opportunity to explore movement in a different way, whether there's been abusive movement or compensatory movement or avoidance of movement. So exploring movement in a different way. Yoga's been heavily researched and proven to decrease stress and anxiety, and we're getting more information on its role in depression. So how can we know that anxiety and depression are two existing conditions when many people have an eating disorder, have those conditions as well. So how can we sequence our classes to address those symptoms and provide our clients not that we're treating the symptoms by any means, but providing them some tools to manage the effects of those symptoms. And so there's that piece of it. And then how can we help people appreciate what their body can do versus what it looks like?
Mm-hmm.
So there's just some things. And I get very excited when I talk about both nutrition and yoga, so I will slow down.
No, that's totally okay. I'm listening, and I have so many questions come up because those are like my primary interests too. The physical wellness, which started with yoga for me, and I know even during my eating disorder experience, I was trying to exercise a lot and was really forcing my body. And through yoga, to what I was doing was being like the controlling boss over my body
Mhm.
in food and in exercise. And to later, when I did yoga training, to actually come inside and start feeling and working with my body. Like I said, I use this phrase a lot, but it makes so much sense to me now. Work with your body rather than on it.
Yeah.
Um, Yoga is a great tool for that. And yeah, so I get excited too.
Well, I love the way that you do describe what yoga can do as far as the relationship to your body and bridging the body and the mind. And what I like to say is that your relationship to your body is the longest relationship you'll ever have,
Mm,
longer than any other relationship. So, will you always be in love with it? Like, will you always be thrilled about every aspect of your body? Well, no. That's long-term relationships have its ups and downs, but if it's rooted in love and deep respect and self-care, or if you can get back to that place, which we all had, at least we assume, we don't have research to prove that, but we can assume that as babies, we had a pretty good relationship with our bodies. We don't know any different anyway. And so we can get back to that place or develop that relationship in a healthier way so that we can learn how to ride out the ups and downs of a long-term relationship, because there will always be ups and downs. But if you can approach it with self-care and respect, you can go arm in arm, hand in hand, with the mind-body connection, facing those challenges in life instead of pulling away from each other and having that resistance exist.
Wow, that's awesome. We are totally on the same, riding the same track in the same car and all that. It's awesome. Well, I was going to ask you for some closing thoughts, but I don't know how, that's awesome. Your body you have the longest relationship with yourself and with your body, and then it will change. And maybe do you have some maybe top tips for developing that self-love and self-compassion? Because I know that that can be a long road. I mean, are there certain quick ways in?
Well, it's probably not going to surprise you that I would say yoga's for a lot of people one of the quickest ways in, because it's kind of like if you're having a hard time in a long-term relationship and you're forced to sit together side by side, what usually happens, like the walls come down and the conversations can start happening, and what's there and what you're dealing with. So yoga kind of forces us in not a forceful way, but it creates the really, really close opportunity and connection to see what's actually there. So what I like to think about it is we all have this wise part of ourselves, and if we can connect and slow down and observe what we're noticing in the body, the messages that the mind sends to the body, in a non-reactive way, in a curious but not furious way, then we can see it as collecting information. And one way you can start doing that, set yoga aside, is start to quiet down and notice how you talk about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What messages do you send about yourself? And would you send those same messages to somebody you love or a friend?
Yes.
If the answer is no, well, then there's something there to explore.
Those are beautiful tips. Those are wonderful. And I love in a curious and not furious way.
Yes.
Those are going to be in the show notes highlighted for sure.
Thank you.
So in closing, where can people find some information about you and or the program?
Well, definitely on our website, emilyprogram.com. We have a lot of information. We have a lot of great resources with books and links to other professional resources in the area, as well as we have a yoga and nutrition blog and other blogs that I think your viewers and listeners would really enjoy looking through. So we have different yoga poses and techniques that that our clients have requested over time, and also great other resources with just common questions that our clients have about the recovery journey. So our website, I think, is a really great resource. And then we also have, I think I had mentioned books as well listed there. And if folks are really interested in a couple of books in particular, I would say we have a link to Carolyn Costin and Joe Kelly's new book, Yoga and Eating Disorder Treatment. And then we have some other great authors listed there, one of which is a book called Talking to Eating Disorders, How People Can Help and Support. So just check out the website. I think we've got some good resources there for sure.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited about what we talked about and what there is to share. And I think there's some really great nuggets in this podcast. And thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, such a pleasure to talk to you. It's probably good that we're doing this over a webinar. Otherwise, we'd probably be like grabbing each other and
you can feel it. Yes.
I just have that feeling.
Yeah, I think we would. Well, thanks so much for having me, Tara. And also thanks to your listeners and your viewers. I really appreciate the time, and anyone who's struggling out there, just keep going forward. Don't give up. Some of the greatest things have been accomplished by people who just keep moving forward and not give up hope.
Absolutely wonderful advice. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Weight Free Wellness podcast today. Did you know? Actually, I want to encourage you to share your favorite episodes with those you know and care about who could really benefit from them. This is not to solely bolster or boost the Weight Free Wellness podcast listenership. It is the whole point of the Weight Free Wellness podcast, which is to help and encourage people on their wellness journey. And it helps to get the word out there and help others. And you can play a really integral role in helping someone begin or continue their journey. Also, join us on Facebook, where we have post podcast discussions with you and also with our guests. You can find the links for that at weightfreewellness.com, and you'll see the icons for Facebook. Just click on those and you'll find us very easily. And I look forward to seeing you there. Take care.